My name is Rebecca, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought the words "you're not family" could cut so deep until my sister Heather spat them at me during our grandmother Eleanor's funeral. The room fell silent, champagne glasses frozen mid-toast. In that moment, my entire identity shattered like fine crystal on marble. Little did Heather know. Grandma Eleanor had one final surprise that would turn our world upside down. How could my own sister disown me, then desperately need me weeks later? The irony still makes me laugh when I think about Grandma's last surprise. Before I dive into this wild family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more unbelievable true stories like mine. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for how this one ends. Before my world imploded, I had what most would consider a stable life. I worked as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital, a career I loved with my whole heart. Every day I helped sick children feel a little better, a little safer. My colleagues became like family, and my small apartment, though nothing fancy, was my sanctuary after long shifts. But the real center of my universe was my grandmother Eleanor. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 7, Grandma stepped in and raised me in her beautiful Victorian home in Cambridge. Those high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and the garden where we'd plant tulips every spring. That house held every meaningful memory of my childhood. Family dynamics in our home were complicated. I was always the responsible one, the one who helped Grandma with her medication, who made sure bills were paid on time, who kept the family calendar. Heather, my sister, was 3 years younger and somehow became Grandma's favorite grandchild. At least that's how it seemed to everyone. Heather got away with everything: missed curfews, failed classes, borrowing money she never repaid. Grandma would just smile and say, "That's just how Heather is," like her behavior was charming rather than concerning. Despite this obvious favoritism, I never resented my grandmother. She had raised us both after tragedy, doing her best with 2 traumatized little girls. And I had dreams of my own that kept me focused forward. Someday opening my own pediatric clinic where I could create a healing environment specifically designed for children with anxiety and trauma backgrounds. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs of Heather's jealousy and entitlement that I chose to ignore. The snide comments about how I was playing martyr when I'd visit Grandma multiple times a week. The eye rolls when Grandma would praise my work ethic. The way Heather would forget to tell me about family gatherings until the last minute. When Grandma's health began declining about 8 months ago, these tensions only grew worse. I adjusted my work schedule to part-time so I could help care for her, driving her to doctor appointments, managing her medications, and making sure she was eating properly. Heather, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent, only appearing for Sunday dinners when Grandma felt well enough to cook her famous pot roast. "Your sister is busy with her own life," Grandma would say, defending Heather's absence. "She calls me every day." But the call log on Grandma's phone told a different story. It was during a Thanksgiving gathering last year when I first heard Heather make a strange comment about real family. We were setting the table, and I suggested using Grandma's good china since the whole family was together. "I think actual family members should decide things like that," Heather had said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. I brushed it off as Heather being her usual difficult self, but now I realize it was the first drop in what would become a torrential downpour. Around the same time, I began noticing Grandma behaving secretively with certain documents. She'd quickly slide papers into drawers when I entered her study. Twice, I arrived unexpectedly to find Mr. Harrison, her lawyer, leaving through the side door. "Just getting some affairs in order," Grandma would say dismissively when I asked. "Nothing for you to worry about, dear." What struck me as odd was Heather's sudden interest in Grandma's estate. She'd never cared about family heirlooms or property before, but now she was asking questions about the deed to the house, about Grandma's investments, about antiques that had been in the family for generations. "Just trying to be prepared," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Someone in this family needs to think about practical matters." I should have pressed harder, asked more questions. But Grandma seemed to have everything under control, and I trusted her judgment completely. That trust, as it turned out, was both misplaced and absolutely correct, a paradox I wouldn't understand until much later. The last normal day we had together. Grandma and I sat in her garden drinking chamomile tea. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, and she seemed peaceful, more so than she had in months. "Rebecca," she said, taking my hand, "no matter what happens, remember that family is more than blood. It's about who loves you enough to put your happiness before their own." At the time, I thought she was just being philosophical. Now I know she was trying to prepare me for what was coming. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember checking the time as my phone lit up the darkness of my bedroom. That moment of disorientation before the dread set in. It was the night nurse from Grandma's home care service. "Miss Davis, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but your grandmother has passed away." The nurse explained that Grandma had gone peacefully in her sleep, no signs of distress. She'd checked on her just an hour earlier, and Eleanor had been sleeping comfortably. It was the kind of death everyone hopes for, quiet, painless, dignified. But that didn't make the loss any less devastating. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, for what felt like hours. The grief hit in waves, first numbing shock, then crushing pain that made it hard to breathe. My grandmother, my anchor, my true north, was gone. I called Heather immediately. Her phone went to voicemail 3 times before she finally answered, groggy and irritated. "What? Do you know what time it is?" When I told her the news, there was a long silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "The house, was she at the house?" were her first words. Not "how did it happen?" or "are you okay?" but concern about the property. I should have recognized the red flag. "Yes, she was at home," I replied, too grief-stricken to process the strangeness of her question. "I'll be there in the morning." "Don't touch anything until I get there," she said, then hung up. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, phone calls to relatives, and the strange administrative tasks that follow a death. I took charge of most of it, working with Grandma's longtime funeral director, Mr. Collins, to honor her wishes for a simple but elegant service. Heather arrived the next day as promised, but rather than helping with arrangements, she spent most of her time in Grandma's study, going through drawers and files. When I asked what she was looking for, she just said, "Important documents. Someone needs to be practical about these things." The tension between us grew as the funeral approached. Heather questioned every decision I made. The flowers, Grandma's favorite lilies. The music, classical pieces she had loved. Even the choice of her burial outfit, a blue dress she had specifically set aside for this purpose. "You always think you know what's best for everyone," Heather snapped when I insisted on following Grandma's documented wishes. "Just because you were here playing the devoted granddaughter doesn't mean you get to control everything now." Despite the friction, we managed to pull together a beautiful service. The old Gothic church where Grandma had attended services for over 50 years was filled with friends, family, and former colleagues. Photographs of her remarkable life, as a young nurse in the 1960s, traveling through Europe in her 30s, holding Heather and me as babies, lined the entrance. When it came time for eulogies, I spoke from the heart about Grandma's kindness, her quiet strength, her ability to find joy in small moments. I shared how she'd taught me to make her famous apple pie, how she'd sat up with me all night when I was studying for nursing exams, how her unwavering support had shaped the person I'd become. From my place at the podium, I could see Heather in the front row, checking her watch, scrolling through her phone when she thought no one was looking. Her disconnection from the moment was jarring. But I focused on honoring Grandma rather than confronting my sister's behavior. After the church service and burial, everyone gathered at Grandma's Victorian home for the reception. The house was filled with people sharing memories and offering condolences. I moved through the rooms in a daze, accepting hugs, thanking people for coming, trying to be the gracious hostess Grandma had taught me to be. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to leave, I gathered the remaining family members in the living room for a toast. With a glass of Grandma's favorite champagne raised, I began to speak about continuing her legacy of kindness and family unity. That's when Heather stepped forward, her own glass raised not in solidarity but almost as a weapon. "I think it's time we clarified something," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Before everyone gets too sentimental about Rebecca's touching speech and her so-called devotion to Grandma." The room fell silent. Our cousins, aunts, and Uncle shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Rebecca likes to play the role of the perfect granddaughter, the real family member who sacrificed everything for Grandma, Heather continued, her words slurring slightly from too much champagne. But there's something you should all know. Something Grandma should have told you years ago. My stomach dropped as Heather turned to face me directly, her eyes hard with an emotion I couldn't quite name, satisfaction perhaps or vindication. You're not family, she said, each word like a physical blow. You're not even blood-related. Grandma only took you in out of pity. The glass nearly slipped from my hand as I struggled to process her words. What are you talking about? You're adopted, Heather continued, seeming to gain energy from my shock. Some distant cousin died, and Grandma felt obligated to take you in. You're not a Davis. You're not my sister. You're just someone Grandma felt sorry for. The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Aunt Patricia gasped. Uncle Robert tried to intervene, telling Heather this wasn't the time or place. But the damage was done. I looked around at the faces of my family, and saw doubt, confusion, and pity replacing the warmth that had been there moments before. I don't remember setting down my glass or walking out of the room. I just remember the cool air hitting my face as I stumbled onto the porch, tears blurring my vision, my entire sense of identity collapsing around me. The drive home was a danger I shouldn't have attempted, tears making the road a watery blur, memories of my childhood with Grandma playing like a cruel film reel in my mind. Was it true? Was I not really Eleanor's granddaughter? Not really Heather's sister? Had my entire life been built on a foundation of lies and pity, rather than love and family bonds? I spent that night awake, staring at old family photos, searching for resemblances I'd always taken for granted. In the harsh light of Heather's revelation, I suddenly couldn't see myself in any of their faces. The sense of belonging I'd felt my entire life had been shattered with a few cruel words, leaving me adrift in an ocean of uncertainty and grief. The week after the funeral passed in a fog of disbelief and anguish. I called into the hospital and took emergency leave, unable to imagine putting on scrubs and caring for sick children when I could barely get out of bed. My supervisor, Grace, was understanding. I had accumulated months of unused vacation and personal days over the years. Take all the time you need, she said gently. The kids will be waiting for their favorite nurse when you're ready to come back. But the truth was, I didn't know if I would ever be ready to go back. Every aspect of my life felt like a lie, including my career choice. Had I become a pediatric nurse because of some unconscious desire to care for the child I had been, orphaned, vulnerable, in need of protection? Was nothing about me authentic? I stopped answering calls from friends and colleagues after the third or fourth time. I broke down in tears trying to explain what had happened. It was easier to retreat into isolation, to curl up in my apartment with the blinds drawn, moving between my bed and the couch in a cycle of fitful sleep and vacant wakefulness. The only person I spoke to during those dark days was Martha, my grandmother's oldest friend and our neighbor growing up. If anyone would know the truth about my origins, it would be Martha. I called her on the 5th day of my self-imposed isolation, my voice hoarse from crying and disuse. Martha, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, I said without preamble when she answered. There was a pause, then a sigh. This is about what Heather said at the funeral, isn't it? So it's true, I whispered, a fresh wave of pain washing over me. Another long pause. Eleanor should have been the one to tell you, Martha finally said. She always meant to when the time was right. But then your parents died and you were so traumatized. She didn't want to add another loss to what you'd already suffered. Martha explained with obvious reluctance that I had indeed been adopted as an infant. My biological mother had been a distant cousin of Eleanor's who died in childbirth. My biological father had never been in the picture. But listen to me, Rebecca, Martha said firmly. Eleanor loved you as her own from the moment she held you. When your parents, your adoptive parents, died, she stepped in without hesitation. You were her granddaughter in every way that mattered. Her words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened my confusion. If Grandma had loved me so much, why had she never told me the truth? And how had Heather known when I hadn't? After hanging up with Martha, I fell into an even deeper depression. I felt betrayed not just by Heather but by Grandma. the person I had trusted most in the world. Every memory now seemed suspect, colored by this new knowledge. Had her love been real? Or merely obligation toward an orphaned relation? Had her pride in my accomplishments been genuine, or overcompensation for my lack of real family connection? On the 10th day of my isolation, my best friend Amber used her spare key to enter my apartment after I had ignored her texts and calls for days. She found me unwashed, surrounded by old photo albums and family mementos, the apartment in disarray. "Enough," she said, opening curtains and windows to let in fresh air and light. "I'm not leaving until you shower, eat something that didn't come from a delivery app, and tell me what the hell is going on." Amber's tough love was exactly what I needed. Under her watchful eye, I showered for the first time in days, ate a proper meal, and finally shared the whole story. Heather's public humiliation, Martha's confirmation, my spiraling identity crisis. "So what if you're adopted?" Amber said when I finished. "Eleanor raised you. She loved you. Anyone who spent 5 minutes with you too could see that. But she lied to me my entire life," I protested. "Did she, though?" Amber challenged. "Or did she just not tell you something that she thought might hurt you? There's a difference between lying and protecting." Amber's perspective gave me pause. She helped me clean up the apartment and suggested I start going through some of Grandma's personal items that I'd brought home after the funeral, a few jewelry boxes, photo albums, and a small chest of keepsakes that Grandma had always said would be mine someday. Among the items in the chest, I found dozens of birthday cards I'd made for Grandma over the years, report cards with her proud comments in the margins, the acceptance letter to nursing school that she'd framed, newspaper clippings of community awards I'd received. Each item carefully preserved, evidence of a love that seemed far deeper than obligation. I also found a small journal, bound in faded blue leather, that I'd never seen before. Opening it revealed my grandmother's distinctive handwriting, entries dating back to when I was first brought to live with her and my grandfather after my biological mother's death. October 15th, 1990, held baby Rebecca today. So tiny, so perfect. Her mother's eyes, definitely. My heart breaks for what Claire will miss, watching this little one grow. But I promise, sweet girl, you will be so loved. Asterisk December 24th, 1991 Christmas with Rebecca. John says I'm spoiling her with too many presents, but how can I help it? She smiled at me today, a real smile, not just gas. And I swear she already knows who I am. Asterisk July 3rd, 1991. Rebecca took her first steps today, toddling right into my arms. I wish Claire could see her daughter's courage, her determination. I see so much of her in this child. Blood tells. The entries continued through the years, documenting my childhood with love and pride that couldn't possibly be faked. One entry in particular, written after my parents' funeral, made me weep. April 18, 1997. How does one explain to a 7-year-old that her parents are never coming home? Rebecca hasn't spoken since we told her. She just sits at the window waiting. I told her today that she would live with us now, and she asked, "Forever?" When I said yes, she crawled into my lap for the first time since the accident. I will protect this child with everything I have. She is family, she has always been family no matter what anyone says. Reading these private thoughts, I began to question Heather's version of events. Grandma hadn't taken me in out of pity. She had loved me deeply from the very beginning. And what did Heather mean by not blood-related? When Martha had confirmed I was related to Grandma through my biological mother. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a spark of determination breaking through the fog of depression. Heather had lied, or at least distorted the truth, about my relationship with Grandma. What else might she be lying about? 2 weeks after the funeral, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a formal notice from Harrison and Associates law firm, informing me that the reading of Eleanor Davis's last will and testament would take place the following Friday at 10 a.m. The letter jolted me from my grief-induced inertia. I hadn't even thought about Grandma's will or inheritance, too consumed by the emotional fallout of Heather's revelation. But now practical matters demanded attention. I would have to face my family again, including Heather. The day before the scheduled reading, I drove to Grandma's house to collect a few more personal items, photo albums, her recipe book, the quilt we had made together during my high school years. I was surprised to find the locks had been changed. My key no longer worked. As I stood on the porch, jiggling the key uselessly, Heather's car pulled into the driveway. She emerged, designer sunglasses masking her eyes, an expensive handbag dangling from her arm. "What are you doing here?" she asked, making no move to approach. "I came to get some of Grandma's recipes and photos," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "My key doesn't work." "I had the locks changed," Heather said with a shrug. "Family property needs to be protected. You understand." The emphasis on family was unmistakable. Another deliberate wound. "I am family," I said quietly. "Whatever you may think." Heather removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes cold with contempt. "That's not what I've heard. Cousin Lucy told me you've been calling around, asking questions about your real mother. Sounds like you've accepted the truth." My heart sank. I had indeed called a few older family members, seeking information about my biological mother, but I hadn't expected those private conversations to become family gossip. "I'm just trying to understand my history," I said. "That doesn't make me any less Eleanor's granddaughter." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Heather replied, brushing past me to unlock the door. She paused in the doorway. "By the way, I've been hearing some concerning things about items going missing from the house after the funeral. Family heirlooms. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The accusation hit like a slap. "Are you suggesting I stole from Grandma's house?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Heather said with false sweetness. "Just mentioning what people are saying. See you at the reading tomorrow." The door closed in my face, leaving me stunned and furious on the porch. Heather wasn't just content to exclude me from the family. She was actively working to damage my reputation with relatives. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison and Associates 10 minutes early, steeling myself for another confrontation. The reception area was already filled with family members, Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, cousins from both sides, even distant relatives I only saw at major holidays. The atmosphere was tense, conversations hushed, and I noticed several people stop talking when I entered. Heather sat in a corner, dressed in appropriate funeral black, playing the role of grieving granddaughter to perfection. She didn't acknowledge my arrival. At precisely 10 a.m., Mr. Harrison, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, invited us all into the conference room. I chose a seat far from Heather, near the door in case I needed a quick escape. Mr. Harrison began with formalities, expressions of sympathy, explanations of legal terms, the standard preamble to a will reading. He seemed uncomfortable, fidgeting with his glasses and clearing his throat repeatedly. "Now to the distribution of assets," he finally said, opening a folder. "Mrs. Eleanor Davis amended her will approximately 6 months ago. The document I am about to read represents her final wishes as legally expressed at that time." My stomach clenched at 6 months ago, exactly when Grandma's health had begun declining more rapidly, when Heather had suddenly become more interested in the estate. The will Mr. Harrison read seemed to confirm my worst fears. The Victorian house, which had been in the family for generations, was left to Heather. So were the majority of Grandma's investments, her art collection and family heirlooms. To me, Eleanor had left $25,000 in cash, her personal jewelry, and the items contained in the cedar chest in the attic, which Rebecca will remember. As Mr. Harrison read these modest bequests, I felt eyes on me, some pitying, others satisfied. Across the room, Heather maintained a solemn expression, but I caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. It didn't make sense. Grandma had always talked about me taking over the family home someday. She knew how much I loved that house, how many memories it held for me. The disparity in the inheritance seemed designed to make a statement about who was real family and who wasn't. When Mr. Harrison finished reading, he asked if there were any questions. I remained silent, determined to maintain my dignity despite the hurt. A few relatives asked clarifying questions about specific items or tax implications, but soon the reading was concluded. As people began to file out, already discussing lunch plans and when they would return to their respective homes, Mr. Harrison approached me. Ms. Davis, Rebecca, could I speak with you privately for a moment? He asked quietly. Assuming he had administrative details to discuss, I nodded and followed him to his private office, away from curious ears. Once inside, he closed the door and motioned for me to sit. What I'm about to tell you is highly irregular, he began, his professional demeanor giving way to obvious discomfort. But I've known your grandmother for 40 years, and I cannot in good conscience allow this situation to proceed without speaking up. My confusion must have shown on my face. The will I just read, he continued, lowering his voice despite the closed door, was indeed signed by your grandmother 6 months ago, but there are concerning circumstances surrounding its creation. He pulled a file from his drawer, different from the one he'd used in the conference room, and placed it on the desk between us. Your sister began visiting my office with your grandmother about 7 months ago. At first, Eleanor explained that Heather was helping her with transportation due to her vision problems. But over time, I noticed Heather was quite insistent about certain changes to the will. My heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying that your grandmother appeared increasingly isolated in her final months. Family members who used to accompany her, including you, were suddenly absent. When I asked about you, she would say you were busy with work, couldn't make it. But then she would call my office later, alone, asking confused questions about why certain changes had been made. Mr. Harrison removed several documents from the file. I also discovered, through some discreet inquiries, that your sister has accumulated significant gambling debts. Online poker primarily. She's been facing collection actions and has borrowed against her car and condo. The pieces began falling into place. Heather's sudden interest in the estate, the changed locks, the accusations about stolen heirlooms. 2 weeks before your grandmother's passing, she called me very upset. She believed someone had been going through her papers in her study. She asked if anyone could have obtained a copy of her will. When I said no, she seemed relieved but still concerned. He leaned forward, his expression grave. Rebecca, I have reason to believe your sister deliberately isolated your grandmother from other family members, particularly you, in order to influence her estate planning. I cannot prove undue influence, but the circumstances are highly suspicious. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Heather publicly humiliated me with half-truths about my adoption, but she had manipulated our vulnerable grandmother during her final months, all for financial gain. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to process this new betrayal. Because I believe your grandmother was being manipulated, and because... He hesitated. Because I received a very strange call from your sister's attorney this morning, asking if you had been informed about the reading. He seemed particularly anxious to know if you would be attending. When I said yes, he sounded alarmed. The implications were clear. Heather had planned the not-family revelation specifically to drive me away before the will reading, hoping I would be too hurt to attend, too broken to question the inheritance distribution. As I left Mr. Harrison's office, my grief gave way to something else entirely. Determination. Heather hadn't just betrayed me. She had betrayed Grandma, exploiting her declining health and manipulating her trust. That was something I wouldn't let stand. After leaving the lawyer's office, I couldn't bear to go home to my empty apartment with its piles of old photos and mementos. Instead, I drove to Riverside Park, a quiet green space where Grandma used to take me feeding ducks when I was little. It was a crisp spring day, much like the ones we had enjoyed together. But now the beauty of the blooming trees and sparkling water only made my heart ache more intensely. I sat on our bench, the one near the small footbridge, and finally allowed myself to fall apart completely. The tears came in violent waves, deep sobs that made my whole body shake. Passers-by gave me concerned glances but kept their distance, leaving me alone with my grief and rage. Everything I thought I knew had been systematically dismantled. My identity as Eleanor's granddaughter questioned. My place in the family denied. My sister's love, apparently non-existent. And now, even Grandma's final wishes seemed to have been corrupted by Heather's manipulation. As the afternoon faded into evening, I remained on that bench, watching families pass by. Mothers holding children's hands, siblings laughing together, grandparents patiently answering endless questions. All the familial bonds I had taken for granted, now thrown into doubt. In that moment of absolute desolation, a wild thought seized me. What if I just left? What if I packed up my apartment, moved to another city, another state, and started fresh? No complicated family history, no sister who despised me, no painful memories lurking around every corner. I could be anyone. I could reinvent myself completely. The idea took root, growing more appealing as the park emptied and streetlights flickered on. I could request a transfer to another hospital. Children needed nurses everywhere. I could find a small apartment somewhere warm, California maybe, or Florida. Somewhere with no snow to remind me of building snowmen in Grandma's backyard. For 3 days, this escape fantasy sustained me. I researched hospitals in San Diego, browsed apartment listings in Tampa, even looked into the process of legally changing my name. I extended my leave from work, citing family issues, and began sorting through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. My phone rang constantly, Amber, other friends, concerned colleagues. I let everything go to voicemail. Even Martha's increasingly worried messages went unanswered. I was retreating from my life, one silent rejection at a time. On the 4th day of my self-imposed exile, as I was boxing up books I decided to donate, a pounding on my door startled me. "Rebecca Davis, I know you're in there." Amber's voice carried clearly through the door. "Open up or I'm calling the super for a wellness check." When I didn't respond, another voice joined hers. Tracy from Pediatric Oncology, then Michael from Emergency. My friends hadn't just been calling, they had organized an intervention. Defeated and secretly relieved, I opened the door to find 5 of my closest friends crowded in the hallway, all wearing identical expressions of concern. "What the hell is going on?" Amber demanded, pushing past me into the apartment. "You disappear for days, don't answer calls, and now, are you moving?" She gestured to the half-packed boxes scattered around the living room. The genuine worry in their faces broke through the protective numbness I'd cultivated. As we sat crowded in my small living room, the whole story poured out of me. Heather's public humiliation, the adoption revelation, the will reading, Mr. Harrison's suspicions, my plan to flee. "So your solution is to run away?" Tracy asked when I finished. "To let your sister win? What else am I supposed to do?" I countered. "Fight her for an inheritance I apparently don't deserve? Force my way into a family that doesn't want me?" "First of all," Michael said firmly, "family isn't just about blood. You know that better than anyone. You've built a family with us at the hospital. Second, it sounds like your grandmother absolutely wanted you as family. Are you really going to let Heather's version override hers?" His words hit home. Grandma had chosen to raise me, chosen to love me, regardless of my biological origins. In my grief and confusion, I had allowed Heather's cruelty to overshadow that fundamental truth. Still, the practical problems remained. "The will gives Heather everything that matters," I said. "The house, the investments. It's her word against mine about Grandma being manipulated, and she has all the legal power now." "Maybe not," Amber said thoughtfully. "Your lawyer seemed concerned about the circumstances. And if what he told you is true, there might be a way to challenge the will." The idea of a legal battle with Heather was exhausting to contemplate. More family drama, more public airing of private pain. But the alternative, letting her get away with manipulating Grandma, felt even worse. That night, after my friends left with my reluctant promise not to make any hasty decisions, I suffered through another sleepless night. Around 3 a.m., I found myself rummaging through the cedar jewelry box I'd taken from Grandma's room after the funeral. Inside were pieces I remembered from childhood. Her pearl necklace, the cameo brooch she wore to church, the garnet earrings Grandpa had given her on their 40th anniversary. As I lifted the velvet tray that held these familiar treasures, I noticed something unusual. The bottom of the box seemed shallower than it should be. Examining it more closely, I discovered a hidden compartment, the kind found in antique jewelry boxes. Inside was Grandma's locket, a delicate gold oval I hadn't seen in years, and beneath it, a small brass key attached to a tag with neat handwriting. "For when the truth needs finding." The cryptic message sent a chill through me. What truth? What did this key open? I opened the locket, expecting to find the usual family photos, but instead discovered a tiny folded paper tucked inside. Unfolding it with trembling fingers, I read, Asterisk Storage Unit Number 147, Beacon Street Security Storage. In case of emergency, tell no one. Asterisk. Grandma had prepared for something, perhaps the very situation I now found myself in. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there were answers waiting for me. Answers Grandma had ensured would find their way to me when needed most. As dawn broke over the city, I made a decision. I wouldn't run away. I would stay and fight for the truth. For Grandma's real wishes. For my place in the family she had created. Heather's betrayal had brought me to my lowest point, but something Grandma used to say echoed in my mind. Truth always rises to the surface, like cream in milk. It was time to find that truth, whatever it might be. 3 weeks after the will reading, I was slowly rebuilding my life. I had returned to work part-time, finding comfort in the familiar routines of the pediatric ward. I had stopped researching out-of-state apartments. I had even begun tentatively reconnecting with extended family members, discovering that many were skeptical of Heather's behavior at the funeral and after. The key and storage unit information remained my secret. I hadn't visited the unit yet, partly out of fear of what I might find, partly because I wanted to be in a stronger emotional state before confronting whatever Grandma had left there. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The caller ID showed Harrison and Associates. Rebecca, this is Gerald Harrison. The lawyer's voice came through, sounding oddly tense. I need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to my office today? Has something happened? I asked, immediately concerned. I would prefer not to discuss this over the phone, he replied. But yes, there have been developments regarding your grandmother's estate. Significant ones. How soon can you be here? The cryptic nature of the call set alarm bells ringing. I can leave work early. I could be there by 4:30. Perfect. And Rebecca, he added, lowering his voice, I suggest you not mention this meeting to anyone in your family. Not yet. After hanging up, I sat at my desk. Mind racing. What developments could be so urgent, so secret? Had Heather done something else? Had new evidence of manipulation emerged? I texted Amber. Emergency meeting with Grandma's lawyer at 4:30. Bad feeling about this. Come with me. Her reply was immediate. Picking you up at 4. We faced this together. True to her word, Amber was waiting outside the hospital at exactly 4 p.m. During the drive to the law office, I filled her in on the mysterious call. Whatever it is, you're not alone this time, she assured me, squeezing my hand as we entered the imposing brick building. Mr. Harrison's assistant immediately ushered us into his private office. The lawyer looked even more agitated in person. His tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled. Glasses perched on top of his head rather than on his nose. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said, gesturing for us to sit. And you are? He asked, looking at Amber. My best friend and moral support, I explained. Anything you need to tell me, she can hear. He nodded, seemingly relieved I hadn't come alone. Very well. Rebecca, something extraordinary has happened. He paused, selecting his words carefully. A second will has been discovered. My heart jumped. A second will? Yes. As I mentioned before, your grandmother had expressed concerns that someone might be going through her papers. It appears those concerns were well-founded. He opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. This morning, I received a call from Beacon Street Security Storage. Your grandmother had rented a safety deposit box there under a corporate name, not her personal name, and arranged for the contents to be delivered to me exactly 1 month after her death if she did not cancel the arrangement. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where the small key from the jewelry box rested. What was in the box? This, he said, tapping the envelope. A will dated 2 weeks after the one we read at the official reading. In it, she explains that she suspected someone was tampering with her papers and pressuring her to make changes to her estate plan. So she created what amounts to a decoy will, the one we read previously, while securing her true final wishes in this document. I could barely breathe. And what does this will say? Mr. Harrison's expression softened. It's quite different from the one we read. The majority of the estate, including the house, the bulk of her investments, and most family heirlooms, is left to you, Rebecca. Heather receives a significantly smaller cash inheritance, with the stipulation that it be placed in a trust managed by my firm and distributed in monthly allowances. The room seemed to spin around me. I don't understand. Why would Grandma do this? And why the secrecy? There's a letter included that explains her reasoning, Mr. Harrison said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. I think you should read it privately. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the pages, immediately recognizing the stationery Grandma had used for important correspondence throughout her life. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, I am gone, and my fears about Heather's behavior have proven justified. I'm so sorry for the pain this situation must be causing you, you must be confused and hurt by the events following my death. Let me explain as best I can. About 7 months ago, Heather began showing an unusual interest in my estate planning. First I was pleased, thinking she was finally taking an interest in family matters. But I soon realized her interest was purely financial. She began suggesting changes to my will, particularly regarding the distribution of assets between you and her. When I resisted, she became manipulative, isolating me from other family, controlling my appointments and phone calls, even tampering with my medication once, which frightened me terribly. I considered confronting her directly but feared what she might do if cornered. Instead, I created a plan. I agreed to her suggested changes, signing the will she and her attorney drafted. But I also created this second will, my true final testament, and secured it where she couldn't find it. I've always known Heather resented you. She felt you received more love, more attention, though I tried so hard to love you both equally. When she discovered the truth about your adoption, yes, I know she found out, though I'd sworn the family to secrecy until I could tell you myself. I feared she would use it against you. Which brings me to the hardest part of this letter. I owe you the complete truth about your origins, a truth I should have shared years ago. Your birth mother was indeed my niece Claire. She was young, unmarried, and died giving birth to you. I loved her like a daughter, and when she was gone, taking you in seemed the most natural thing in the world. What I never told anyone except your grandfather was that Claire had revealed your father's identity to me before she died. He was Thomas McKinnon from the McKinnon family of Westbridge. Our families have been locked in a bitter land dispute for generations. Had they known you were Thomas's child, they might have fought for custody, separated you from the only family you knew. So we kept your parentage secret, legally adopted you, and raised you as our own grandchild, which in every way that matters you are. I planned to tell you everything when you turned 18. But then your parents, my son and his wife who had raised you since infancy, died in that terrible accident. You were so broken by their loss, I couldn't bear to tell you that you had been adopted. Each year I found reasons to delay the conversation, until it seemed too late, the secret too long kept. I was wrong. You deserved the truth. And I hope you can forgive an old woman's misguided attempt to protect you from more pain. Rebecca. You are my granddaughter in every way that matters. You are family, real true family. Blood is the least of what binds us. I leave you the house because you love it as I did. I leave you the family heirlooms because you understand their value beyond money. I leave you the bulk of my estate because I trust you to use it wisely, perhaps for that pediatric clinic you've dreamed of opening. As for Heather, I love her despite her flaws. The trust arrangement isn't punishment but protection, from herself, from her gambling addiction she thinks I don't know about. I hope someday she finds peace and purpose beyond material wealth. Oh my love always, Grandma Eleanor. By the time I finished reading, tears streamed freely down my face. Amber, who had been reading over my shoulder, squeezed my hand in silent support. There's more, Mr. Harrison said gently. This morning, I received a call from Alan Berkowitz, your sister's attorney. He was agitated. It seems Heather has already liquidated several of your grandmother's investments and spent a substantial amount of the proceeds. She what? The shock momentarily overrode my emotional response to the letter. Under the terms of the first will, she had the legal right to do so as the primary beneficiary. But with this new will, those actions become deeply problematic. Mr. Berkowitz wanted to know if you had been in contact with me when I was non-committal. He became quite insistent about arranging a meeting between you and Heather. I believe he suspects something has changed. The implications were staggering. Heather had not only manipulated Grandma and lied to the family, she had already spent inheritance money that wasn't rightfully hers. What happens now? I asked, trying to process everything. Legally, we file this will with the probate court. It supersedes the previous one. As for the funds Heather has already spent, he sighed. That becomes a matter for the court. She may be required to repay the estate. Depending on how she obtained access to those funds, there could even be criminal implications. The thought of Heather facing legal consequences for her actions brought me no joy, only a profound sadness. Despite everything, she was still the girl who had shared my childhood, who had once been my closest confidant. Is there an alternative? I asked quietly. Mr. Harrison considered this. You could pursue a private settlement. Allow her to repay the funds over time. Avoid potential criminal charges. But that would require her cooperation and honesty, qualities she hasn't demonstrated much of recently. As I sat there, Grandma's letter clutched in my hand, a strange calm settled over me. The truth was finally rising to the surface, just as Grandma had predicted. Now I had to decide what to do with it. Tell Mr. Berkowitz I'll meet with Heather, I said finally, but not at their office or yours. At Grandma's house, my house now apparently. Tomorrow at noon. Mr. Harrison looked concerned. Are you sure that's wise? Perhaps a neutral location would be better. I shook my head, newfound determination strengthening my voice. No. This needs to end where it began. In the home where we both grew up. Surrounded by Grandma's memory. As Amber and I left the office, the key in my pocket seemed to burn with possibility. Before tomorrow's confrontation, I had one more truth to uncover. Whatever was waiting for me in storage unit number 147. The storage unit was small but meticulously organized, typical Grandma. Labeled boxes lined metal shelves, each with dates and contents noted in her precise handwriting. But what immediately caught my eye was a large trunk in the center of the unit, with my name painted on the lid in blue letters. Inside, I found layer upon layer of my life, preserved with loving care. Baby clothes and my first shoes, school projects from every grade, the acceptance letter to nursing school, framed in silver, news clippings about awards I'd received, photos of milestones, graduations, my first apartment celebrations. But beneath these mementos was a smaller box labeled Rebecca's Origins. With Amber watching silently, I opened it to find a birth certificate naming Claire Davis as my mother, hospital bracelets from my birth, and a sealed envelope with "When Rebecca is ready" written across it. Inside that envelope was the full truth, detailed documentation of my adoption, letters from my birth mother written during her pregnancy, and photos of her that took my breath away. We had the same eyes, the same smile. The resemblance was undeniable. There were also newspaper clippings about the Davis-McKinnon land dispute that had divided the families for generations, making it clear why Grandma had kept my paternity secret. The McKinnons had been powerful, litigious, and according to notes in Grandma's handwriting, had tried to contest other family adoptions in the past. She was protecting you, Amber said softly as we repacked the trunk to take home. All this time I thought she was hiding the truth because she didn't see me as real family, I replied, touching a photo of my birth mother. But she was protecting me from people who might have taken me away from the only family I knew. By the time noon arrived the next day, I was calmly waiting in Grandma's my living room. The trunk from the storage unit sat prominently by the fireplace. On the coffee table lay copies of both wills and Grandma's letter, alongside financial records Mr. Harrison had provided showing the investments Heather had liquidated. The doorbell rang precisely at 12:01. Through the leaded glass, I could see Heather and a balding man I assumed was Mr. Berkowitz, I took a deep breath and opened the door. You changed the locks, Heather said immediately, her tone accusatory. Yes, I replied calmly. Family property needs to be protected. You understand. Her eyes narrowed at having her own words thrown back at her, but she said nothing as she and her lawyer stepped inside. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mr. Berkowitz began as we settled in the living room. I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding your grandmother's estate. We certainly do, I agreed, noting how Heather's eyes darted nervously around the room, lingering on the documents spread across the coffee table. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I laid out everything, the discovery of the second will, the evidence of Heather's manipulation, the funds she had already spent, and the potential legal consequences she faced. Mr. Berkowitz grew increasingly uncomfortable as I spoke, clearly hearing some of these details for the first time. Heather's face cycled through emotions: defiance, fear, anger, and finally, when I mentioned potential criminal charges, something close to panic. You wouldn't do that, she said, her voice losing its usual sharp edge. Press charges against your own sister. My sister? I repeated. I thought I wasn't family. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I was upset at the funeral. You know how things get said in grief. Things get said, yes. But you did more than talk, Heather. You manipulated Grandma when she was vulnerable. You isolated her from family. You tried to steal an inheritance that wasn't rightfully yours. And worst of all, you used my adoption, something that should never have been your information to share, as a weapon to hurt me. Tears filled her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or another manipulation. You don't understand. I needed the money. I'm in trouble, serious trouble. The gambling debts, I said quietly. Grandma knew about those too. Heather's shock was unmistakable. How did she? She knew a lot more than you realized. She loved you, Heather. The trust arrangement in her real will wasn't punishment. It was protection. She was trying to help you. Something in Heather seemed to collapse then. The carefully constructed facade of entitlement and confidence crumbled, leaving behind the scared, troubled woman she truly was. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. I slid a document across the table, a repayment agreement Mr. Harrison had drafted. You return what you've taken on a schedule you can manage. You enter financial counseling and treatment for gambling addiction. And we try to rebuild some kind of relationship, if that's even possible. Mr. Berkowitz reviewed the agreement, clearly relieved it didn't involve criminal charges. This is very generous considering the circumstances. It's what Grandma would have wanted, I said simply. After they left, with a signed agreement and Heather's tearful, possibly sincere apology, I wandered through the house that was now legally mine. Each room held memories, both beautiful and painful, but for the first time since Grandma's death, I felt a sense of peace. Over the following weeks, I began the process of truly claiming my inheritance, not just the physical house and assets, but my place in the family story. I moved into the Victorian home, finding comfort in its familiar creaks and corners. I discovered Grandma's hidden collection of my achievements, carefully preserved in her study behind her law books. I read through Claire's letters, getting to know the young woman who had given me life. And I found myself at 32, experiencing a profound transformation. The identity crisis Heather had triggered with her cruel words at the funeral had led me, ironically, to a stronger sense of self than I'd ever had before. I wasn't just Eleanor's granddaughter by circumstance or charity. I was family by choice, by love, and even by blood through Claire. Using a portion of the inheritance, I established the groundwork for the pediatric clinic I had always dreamed of opening. Eleanor's children's clinic would focus on providing specialized care for children with anxiety and trauma backgrounds, kids whose worlds had been turned upside down, as mine once had been. My relationship with Heather remained complicated. She entered a treatment program for gambling addiction and began making small repayments to the estate. Our interactions were cautious, laden with history but not entirely without hope. Family members who had distanced themselves after the funeral drama began reaching out again, many apologizing for believing Heather's version of events. You've changed, Amber observed one evening as we sorted through old photos for a memorial wall in the clinic. You seem stronger. More certain of yourself. I considered this, looking at a photo of Grandma and me in the garden, her arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. I know who I am now. I said finally. Not just who others say I am. And I know what family really means. The truth, as Grandma had promised, had risen to the surface. And with it came not just pain and revelation, but a profound sense of homecoming to myself, to my history, and to the future I was now free to create. 6 months after discovering Grandma's second will, I stood at a podium in the newly renovated Victorian carriage house that had become Eleanor's children's clinic. The grand opening had drawn a crowd, hospital colleagues, community members, patients and their families, and even several Davis relatives who had reconnected with me in recent months. Family, I began, looking out at the gathered faces, is both blood and chosen. It's the people who show up, who stay, who love you enough to put your happiness before their own. I was quoting Grandma directly, and several older relatives nodded in recognition of her words. Eleanor Davis understood that better than anyone. She created family wherever she went, with patients during her nursing career, with neighbors who became lifelong friends, with children who weren't born to her but were absolutely hers in every way that mattered. As I continued my speech, outlining the clinic's mission to provide trauma-informed pediatric care, I noticed a ripple of surprise moving through the crowd. Following their gazes, I spotted Heather slipping in through the side door, looking nervous but determined. We had spoken only a handful of times in the past months, our relationship still fragile and uncertain. After concluding my remarks and cutting the ceremonial ribbon, I made my way through well-wishers toward where Heather stood awkwardly by the refreshment table. She looked healthier than she had in years, clear-eyed, less frantic, her natural beauty no longer hidden behind excessive makeup and designer clothes used as armor. "I didn't think you'd come," I said, maintaining a careful distance. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But then I found something I thought you should have." She held out a package wrapped in brown paper. It was in the back of my closet. I'd forgotten I had it. Unwrapping it revealed an old family photo album I'd never seen before. "What is this?" "I took it from Grandma's house right after she died," Heather confessed. "Before you came, I was looking for anything that might mention the will. But then when I saw what it was, I just kept it. To hurt you, I think." "I'm sorry." Opening the album, I gasped. The first page showed a young woman who could have been my twin. Same eyes, same smile, same dimple in her left cheek when she laughed. "Claire. My birth mother." "There's more," Heather said quietly. "In the back." Tucked into a pocket in the album's back cover was another letter from Grandma, this one addressed to both Heather and me. "My dear girls. Asterisk, if you're reading this together, then there is hope for healing between you, which gives my heart joy even beyond the grave. Asterisk. Asterisk, Rebecca. I kept the truth about your father from you to protect you from a family feud that began long before either of us was born. The McKinnons would have fought for custody had they known you were Thomas's child, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Perhaps that was selfish of me, but love often is. Asterisk. Asterisk, what I never told anyone, not even your grandfather, was that Thomas and Claire's relationship represented hope for ending the generations-old dispute between our families. They had planned to marry, to unite the families through love rather than litigation. His death in the accident that injured Claire so severely ended that dream. When she learned she was pregnant, already suffering from the complications that would eventually take her life, she made me promise to protect you from the bitterness between the families. Asterisk. Asterisk, Heather. Your resentment of Rebecca has always stemmed from a belief that I loved her more. I failed you both by not addressing this directly. The truth is that raising Rebecca reminded me daily of what we had all lost. Claire, Thomas, the hope of reconciliation. My grief sometimes made me distant when you needed me most. Asterisk. Asterisk, my dearest wish is that you find a way forward together. You are each other's only close family now. The house, the money, the heirlooms, these are just things. What matters is the bond between you if you can rebuild it. Asterisk. With eternal love to you both. Grandma Eleanor. We read it together, standing side by side in the bustling clinic reception area, tears streaming down both our faces. "Did you know any of this?" I asked Heather when we finished. She nodded slowly. Parts of it. I found some letters when I was 16. Snooping in Grandma's desk. I knew you were adopted, knew about Claire. But I didn't understand about the McKinnon connection until now. A strange shock ran through me at her words. McKinnon. The doctor I've been dating, James. His last name is McKinnon. Heather's eyes widened. James McKinnon? From Westbridge. Yes. He's a pediatric surgeon. We met at the hospital last year. The implications were dizzying. Do you think that you're dating someone from your biological father's family? Seems likely. Westbridge isn't that big. The coincidence seemed too perfect to be random. Had Grandma somehow known this would happen? Had she been guiding events even from beyond the grave? I'm sorry, Heather said suddenly, the words seeming to burst from her. Not just for the album. For everything. For what I said at the funeral. For trying to take what was yours. For being so broken. Her voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase the pain or instantly heal the breach between us. But it was honest. Perhaps the first truly honest thing Heather had said to me in years. 90 days sober? I asked, noticing the chip on her keychain. She nodded. 93 actually. One day at a time. Like they say. I'm proud of you, I said and meant it. That takes courage. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, two women with a lifetime of complicated history between them, neither sure how to move forward. Would you like to see the clinic? I finally offered. The therapy rooms are pretty amazing. We have art therapy, play therapy, even a small sensory garden. I'd like that, she said quietly. As I showed Heather around the space that represented my dream, realized something shifted subtly between us. We weren't friends, weren't even fully sisters again yet, but we were something, family, maybe in the truest sense of Grandma's definition. 3 days later, I found myself standing with Heather at Grandma's grave. It was the first time we had visited together since the funeral. We each laid a bouquet of lilies, Grandma's favorite, on the polished granite. I have something to tell you, I said as we stood side by side. I'm pregnant. Heather turned to me, shock evident on her face. James. I nodded. We've been talking about getting married. But now, knowing he might be related to my biological father's family, it's complicated. Life usually is, she said with unexpected wisdom. But Grandma would be thrilled. A great-grandchild. Continuing the family legacy. Family legacy. The phrase held new meaning now, encompassing not just the Davis name or bloodline but the values Grandma had embodied: compassion, resilience, forgiveness, love. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Harrison. I found something else in your grandmother's safety deposit box, he explained. A video recording she made about a year before her death. It's addressed to both you and Heather. I've sent it to your email. With trembling fingers, I called Heather and asked her to come over. Together we sat in Grandma's, my living room, and pressed play on the laptop. Grandma appeared on screen, looking healthy and vibrant, her silver hair neatly styled, her blue eyes so like mine, clear and determined. My darling girls, she began, smiling into the camera. If you're watching this together, then everything has happened as I hoped. Rebecca, you've discovered the truth about your birth and your place in our family. Heather, you've begun facing your demons and finding your way back to the wonderful woman I always knew you could be. She leaned closer to the camera. I want you both to know that nothing that's happened, not the secrets, not the conflicts, not even death, can break the bonds of true family. We are connected by love, by history, by choice, and yes, by blood too, though perhaps not in the ways you always believed. Learn from my mistakes, she continued. Secrets fester, truth heals. Resentment destroys, forgiveness rebuilds. And remember always that family can be lost and found, broken and mended, but never truly erased from your heart. As the video ended with Grandma blowing a kiss to the camera, Heather and I sat in silence, both wiping away tears. Finally, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where evening shadows were lengthening across Grandma's beloved roses. She knew, I said softly. Somehow, she knew exactly how everything would unfold. She always did have a sixth sense about people, Heather agreed, coming to stand beside me. As the sun set over the garden, casting a golden glow over the Victorian home that had witnessed generations of Davis family joy and sorrow. I felt a profound sense of completion. My identity, once shattered by cruel words at a funeral, had been rebuilt stronger than before, not despite the revelations that followed, but because of them. Family, as Grandma had tried to teach us all along, was not defined by blood alone but by the choices we make every day to love, to forgive, to show up for one another. It could be lost and found, broken and rebuilt, but never truly erased. What's your experience with family secrets? Have you ever discovered something that changed how you saw yourself or your family members? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it touched your heart. Remember, family drama happens to everyone. It's how we handle it that defines us. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings some comfort if you're going through family challenges of your own. We're all in this together.